Just yesterday, I was reading about some of my favorite topics. In this case, entrepreneurship and military leadership. Military leadership in particular, because I think I saw somebody write this somewhere and I really believe it's true, which is that the military and like the battlefield is basically just life sped up. So if people learn all these leadership lessons on the battlefield, they can apply elsewhere as well. So military leadership, entrepreneurship, you might ask, what do they have in common? What's the common thread here? And the common thread was that I was reading this book. There were two books I'm reading right now, which are Doing AI. I'm not sure who the author is, but he basically talks about how AI is kind of changing business and interacting with things. I've only just started this book. And The Lean Startup, which talks about, we'll get into that in the video, but talks about keeping a startup kind of lean and mean so you can adapt really quickly. And the book on military leadership was The Psychology of Military Incompetence. And I've only just started that one as well, but they all have a common thread they're starting with in the introduction, which is that in the entrepreneurship books, I'm going to start with the Doing AI one. He starts off with the importance of focusing on the problem, not the solution. And they kind of just start off by talking about some of the risks of AI turning us into a solution-focused rather than a problem-focused kind of a person. And the reason for that is that when you focus on the problem, which is what you're trying to solve, then you can adapt solutions for the problem. But you can make solutions, you can't make problems. If you're focused on the solution, then you have to figure out a problem that fits. But just when you're thinking about it logically, you're a lot less likely to randomly find a problem that fits your solution, especially because there's lots of problems, but there's only so many, right? But you are a whole lot more likely to find a solution that fits your problem. So start with the problem, focus on the problem. One of the books, I haven't started this one yet, but I'm going to start it soon, is Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution, which obviously has this as a core tenet. But basically, focus on the problem, not the solution. Don't fall in love with the solution. Focus on what actually works best for the problem. The Lean Startup is all about this, and they talk about using a minimum viable product, which is just the most basic product that you can make that still gives enough of the experience to see what the customer thinks. And they also talk about basically continuous adaptation in your business model. When you look at a lot of these really successful businesses, they actually pivot midway through. They find a problem, maybe they find a solution, and then they realize that that solution does not fit the problem. Failed businesses focus on that solution and they don't get rid of it. Successful businesses focus on the problem, they realize their solution is not working, they get rid of it, and then they find a new solution and they become successful. Obviously, that's not 100% of the time. There's going to be businesses that focused on the problem, had a great solution, and weren't successful, of course, but you definitely won't be successful if you fall in love with a solution. So that book, really interesting, just talks about, like I said, being lean and mean, adapting constantly. And now, how does this tie into military leadership? In the military leadership book, so The Psychology of Military Incompetence, he starts off with saying basically that all war is a transfer of energy and information. And he starts off with generals in this book, and he says that the general is primarily somebody who's communicating information. And one of the things he said, which I thought was really interesting, is he said the more a piece of information changes things, the more it's resisted. And he had a couple reasons for that. Some of them were just kind of the logical ones, which are just, okay, you have a new piece of information which throws off what you think is going on. Well, you've already made these plans, you've already made a decision, you've already gone ahead and thought through things, you don't really want to have to redo all that. So there's just kind of a natural resistance to change. Humans are also supposed to have just kind of a natural resistance to change. He also said, though, that the more critical, the more crazy, essentially, a piece of information is, the more, rather, a piece of, let's say, intelligence, then the more information it carries, the more kind of almost data there is in it, and your ability to process that data might be too limited, essentially, to take in that new piece of information, which I honestly don't quite understand fully yet, but I thought that was really interesting, this idea that perhaps there's this natural resistance to change, but also perhaps you need to build up your ability to take in and process new information that has a very high, essentially, let's say, informational load in it. So let's say you got like a unit of information, could have a low information load, a very high information load. High information load is harder to process. I thought all of those were really interesting, and it really shows, once again, what I've seen, which is, and I haven't mentioned this, so it really shows what I've seen, which is kind of that link between just leadership, military leadership, entrepreneurship in many ways is kind of leadership and problem solving. They've got a lot of ties, but just this idea that what makes a general successful, taking in new information, being able to act on it, making good decisions, is also what makes someone like an entrepreneur successful, where they're taking in new information. They need to be able to adapt and make good decisions. And both people, you can also think about it this way, which is an entrepreneur still building an organization. A general has an organization, but they're using organizational management. Both people are managing that organization using very similar skills. Key lesson here is make sure that you take in new information, you're not scared of it, and you try to really analyze things and be willing to adapt. Fall in love with that problem, and don't worry about the solution so much. Make sure the solution fits the problem.